I never imagined I'd see election fraud right in my own backyard, but there I was, staring at grainy security footage of our HOA president, Linda Harper, stuffing the community ballot box like she was hiding EVY Denke. The VY Deo caught her sneaking up to the drop box outside our clubhouse, not once, but multiple times over 2 dusky evenings, each trip with a fistful of identical envelopes. It was the kind of thing you'd expect in a gritty crime show, not in Meadow VYEW Estates, our tidy suburban haven where the biggest drama was usually someone's unapproved mailbox color. The next morning, at the vote count, Linda stood at the front of the clubhouse, her perfectly pressed blazer and smug grin practically screaming VY Tory. "I'm thrilled to announce," she said, pausing for effect, "that I've been elected president, treasurer, secretary, and chair of the landscaping committee." The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Then my neighbor, Mike, shot up from the back, his voice cutting through the tension. "This is rigged!" he bellowed, and you could feel the room shift. Everyone was thinking it, but he said it. Linda's face turned a shade of crimson I didn't know existed. She gripped her gold necklace like it was a lifeline and snapped. "Order, please!" Meadow VYEW had always been a quiet place, as peaceful as any neighborhood could be with an HOA breathing down your neck. We had Rosso, did we have rules? No basketball hoops VY Cybele from the street. Garbage cans had to vanish within 12 hours of pickup. And heaven help you if your front door wasn't one of the 5 approved shades of beige. For years, our HOA board had been run by folks who got it, keep property values up, but don't make life a nightmare. That all changed when Linda moved in 2 years ago. She hit the ground running, determined to restore order to what she called our sloppy standards. Linda was the kind of woman who carried a ruler to measure your grass, Leah VYing violation notices if it crept past 3.5 inches. She'd snap photos of cars parked an inch too far from the curb and report them to the board. Once, she called a tow truck on a plumber fixing a burst pipe at the Thompsons' house because his van sat in their driveway for too long, 4 hours, to be exact. When the board elections were announced last month, Linda didn't just throw her hat in the ring, she slid a 16-page manifesto under every door, vowing to whip our community into shape. It was less a campaign and more a declaration of war. What we didn't see coming was how far she'd go to win. It started with her volunteering, though, insisting she oversee the entire election. "I have extensive experience with proper protocols," she declared at the pre-election meeting, her voice dripping with authority. Nobody could recall her ever mentioning elections before, but she bulldozed through, taking charge of mailing ballots, guarding the drop box, and counting votes. When a few of us, myself included, pointed out the conflict of interest, she waved us off with a flick of her manicured hand. "I'm the only one here who understands Robert's Rules of Order," she said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm no expert, but I'm pretty sure Robert never wrote a rule about one person running an election like a dictator." Then things got weird. Neighbors started talking. The Wilsons across the street never got their ballots. The elderly Hendersons were told by Linda that voting had closed 2 days before the deadline. My next-door neighbor, Sarah, got a note from Linda saying her ballot was invalid because she'd voted for Linda's opponent, Greg. I started jotting down these stories, but it was all whispers and no proof until Ethan, the 16-year-old tech was 2 doors down, came to me the day before the vote count. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice low, "you need to see this." Ethan had helped the old HOA board set up the clubhouse Wi-Fi last year, including a security camera pointed at the entrance and ballot box. Everyone had forgotten about it, everyone except Ethan, who still had the login. "I was checking the system for a school project," he explained, "and I saw something weird at night." He opened his laptop, and my jaw hit the floor. There was Linda, night after night, creeping up to the Dropbox with stacks of envelopes. Sometimes she'd glance around, nervous as a cat, before show-viewing them in. Other times, she'd stroll up casually, like she was dropping off a single letter while, accidentally, holding a dozen more. Ethan had compiled footage from 5 nights, showing 8 trips total. I counted 67 extra ballots, he said, pointing to his notes. In a neighborhood of 120 homes, that was more than enough to steal the election. I thanked Ethan and told him to back everything up. This wasn't just about an annoying neighbor anymore. Linda was breaking the law. Election fraud is election fraud, whether it's for the White House or the Meadow VYEW HOA. I called a few trusted neighbors, and on we hatched a plan for the vote count meeting the next evening. Linda had no idea what was coming. The clubhouse was packed that Friday night, the air thick with tension. Linda had set herself up at the front table, flanked by her two loyal cronies who nodded along to her every word. She started with that syrupy tone she used before dropping bad news. I'm pleased to report a record turnout in 94% of eligible households. My stomach churned. We'd never broken 60% in any election. Then she laid it on thick. The community has spoken, and I'm humbled to accept all positions: president, treasurer, secretary, and landscaping chair. She claimed 102 votes for president out of 113 ballots cast. In a neighborhood with 120 homes, where some folks never even got ballots. The math was a joke. Murmurs rippled through the room. Linda raised her voice, basking in her moment. I accept these responsibilities with the gravy tie they deserve. That's when I stood up, my heart pounding. Point of order, I said, borrowing her fancy lingo. Before we certify these results, we have evidence of serious irregularities. Her face darkened as I nodded to Ethan, who hooked his laptop to the projector. The room went quiet as the footage played. Linda, clear as day, stuffing the ballot box. Someone gasped. Another yelled, "That's illegal!" Linda's face went from red to ghostly white. "This is preposterous," she stammered. "I was delivering ballots for elderly neighbors who couldn't make it." It might have worked if the VYDO didn't show her sneaking around at midnight, stuffing envelopes like a kid hiding candy wrappers. "Then you won't mind if we verify with those neighbors?" I asked, pulling out my phone. "I've got a list of everyone, just want to call them now." Her story was crumbling, and she knew it. While this was unfolding, Sarah had slipped out and called the cops. 20 minutes later, 2 officers walked in. "We got a report of potential election fraud," one said, scanning the room. Linda strode toward them, all confidence. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. These people are disrupting an official HOA proceeding." The officers glanced at the frozen VYDO frame on the projector. Linda, mid-stuff. "Ma'am, we'd like to ask you some questions," the second officer said. "And we'll need to see those ballots." Linda's facade cracked. "The ballots are private HOA business. You have no jurisdiction." The officer calmly explained that tampering with any election, even in HOAs, could be fraud under state law, especially since our dues funded the organization. They opened the ballot box and pulled out a few envelopes. "Interesting," one officer said, laying out 5 ballots. "These all have the same handwriting." He looked at Linda, whose face was now ashen. "Did you fill out multiple ballots yourself?" Linda snapped. "This community needs proper leadership," she shrieked. "These people don't understand standards. Someone had to take control." "That was it," she confessed. The officers asked her to step outside, and through the windows, we saw her gesturing wildly, then pointing back at us. Finally, one officer pulled out handcuffs. "You can't be serious," Linda's voice echoed. "It's just an HOA election." But they were serious. They cuffed her, read her rights, and led her to the patrol car. With Linda gone, the old board stepped in, secured the ballots as evidence, and announced a new election in 2 weeks, this time with a neutral third party counting votes. The room erupted in cheers. Neighbors I barely knew thanked me and Ethan, and even the HOA skeptics were fired up. 3 weeks later, the county prosecutor charged Linda with multiple counts of fraud and falsifying documents. With our HOA's hefty dues and assets, they were treating it as a serious financial crime, up to 5 years in prison and due la $25,000 in fines. A restraining order banned her from HOA active ties pending her case. I saw Linda one last time before her hearing, wrestling with a for sale sign in her yard, ironic, since she'd written the rule banning their removal. When she spotted me, her face twisted with rage. Happy now? She yelled. You've ruined my life over stupid neighborhood politics. I just shook my head and kept walking. Some folks never learn that rules apply to everyone, even those who think they're above them.